Thank you so much, David, for the introduction, and to ALEC for the great honor it is to be able to address this particular luncheon, and for myself and two colleagues to attend the conference. It's an honor to be here, and it's great to be back in Arizona, where my wife and I try to be, together with our parents, my parents, try to be responsible property owners here in Santan Valley. I'm not sure if you've heard, but in the winter it gets a little cold in Canada. And you know, you'll hear Canadians from time to time, and you'll also hear this from North Dakotans and people from Montana. They'll say, yeah, it's cold in the winter, but it's a dry cold. I don't know what that means. I'm from there, and I've really never understood it. We're about 3 weeks away from a more recent election. We're happy to have been re-elected on the 7th of November at home in Saskatchewan, and so we're just about to go back into the Legislative Assembly in our province, and this is a great chance to tell you a little bit about our province and hopefully to highlight some important developments, some not so positive, on the trade front between our two countries. We know how important the relationship is. I see where your council describes itself as committed to promoting policies based on the Jeffersonian principles of limited government, free market choices for consumers, lower taxes, and individual liberty. Jefferson also quite wisely once said this: laws are made for men of ordinary understanding, and should therefore be construed by the ordinary rules of common sense. My message today is that, sadly, with respect to the relationship between Canada and the United States, common sense is not always prevailing. It is, in fact, right now, if I may speak respectfully but bluntly, it is an awkward time for us to be friends with the United States. In September, you excluded us from bidding on about $100 billion worth of the latest iteration of stimulus under the auspices of the Buy American provision. I was the chair of the premiers some time ago. We alternate, we take turns. When we worked with our Prime Minister, Conservative Stephen Harper, to offer a deal to the President, to the administration, on their first American stimulus package, where there were also some protectionist Buy American provisions, and we came to an agreement. We opened up all of our government procurement, and we were exempted from the Buy American provision. And then just a few years later, here we are again, singled out as a result of the Buy American provisions. That's awkward. In October, you announced a $5.50 tax. Well, you didn't. The administration did, on all Canadians entering this country by air. That's awkward. And then there was the delay and the continued delay of the Keystone XL pipeline. And that's awkward. There have been a few other trade irritations that are normal for a relationship as important and as broad as ours. The situation reminds me of how Lyndon Johnson was advising the incoming presidency of President Nixon when he said, quote, "It's kind of like a jackass caught in a hailstorm. Sometimes you just got to stand there and take it." We don't want to do that. And we know the vast majority of Americans who understand the importance of this relationship don't want to just take it. We need to make sure it's as positive as possible, with both countries' interests protected. And so before I get into a little bit more detail, and specifically I want to talk about energy and energy security, let me introduce you to my province. That's what I'm paid to do by the people of Saskatchewan. So there it is. There's the province of Saskatchewan. You can see why our unofficial motto is Saskatchewan. Hard to pronounce, but easy to draw. Adlai Stevenson once said after a visit to our province, he said, "Saskatchewan is a lot like Texas, only friendlier to the United States." As you will see, we are fortunate. We are blessed by Providence with a number of natural resources and a great population, and I'm not going to get into all of the details, but here's a list of the things we have a lot of, and we do produce a lot of things, and a lot of it's agriculture related. Food, fertilizer, and energy is what we're really good at. We're trying to diversify away from a dependence on those resources, but it's something we're proud of. I'm going to focus, though, today, if I may, on energy. Saskatchewan is Canada's second largest producer of energy, of oil, I should say, be more specific. We are home to a large part of the Bakken Play, which many of you will know is, the U.S. Geological Survey has pointed out, the largest conventional oil play in North America, bigger than Prudhoe Bay. The Bakken Play is principally in Saskatchewan, Montana, North Dakota, and a bit in our neighboring province of Manitoba, although we're trying to take care of that through some horizontal drilling. We are the third largest producer of natural gas in our country. Thanks, Ian. The third largest producer of natural gas in Canada. We produce on any given year about 20% of the world's uranium. We have about 6% of the uranium reserves in the world, but we produce about 20%. In fact, about 5% of the lights that we'll burn tonight in the United States are powered or fueled by Saskatchewan uranium. So what are our opportunities going forward in our province and on our continent on the issue of energy security? From a provincial perspective, from Saskatchewan's perspective, I like our chances. In a world that's desirous of food security and energy security, I like our chances. And I know the discussion of energy security in this country is principally centered around concerns and challenges identified, but ladies and gentlemen, there are opportunities as well for you and for us. In China, they're building a new coal-fired electrical generating facility at the rate of about one every month. In India, they plan to add 199,000 megawatts of coal-fired capacity in the next decade. That's a 3,000%, beg your pardon, a 300% increase. Coal's not going away. Our own dependence on coal in our province is roughly 50% of our energy needs. I think roughly that's the same ratio that the United States is looking at. So are there opportunities with respect to coal for next generation jobs and for sustainable technology? We think the answer is yes. Saskatchewan, because of a partnership with you, with the United States of America, is home to the world's largest carbon capture and storage project. 40% of all of the successfully stored, geologically stored CO2 on Earth is stored in Saskatchewan, in our southeast corner, because we take CO2 that comes from a coal gasification plant in Beulah, North Dakota. It's piped up to the oil fields of southeast Saskatchewan. It's first used for enhanced oil recovery with great efficacy, I might add. We've seen many-fold increase in oil production because that CO2 is injected in what were thought to be mature assets. The oil is produced, and when the CO2 comes back up, it's stored. And it is stored successfully. The International Energy Agency is the monitor that's confirming this is one way to capture CO2, whether you think it should be captured or not. And in the bargain, for those who aren't that excited about whether it's captured or not, we get to increase oil production without another footprint, without another well drilled, and we all know the salutary benefits of that from an environmental standpoint, especially in terms of habitat. We're also interested in small nuclear technology. We have all of that uranium, and we don't really add any value to the yellow cake, and now we've partnered with companies like Hitachi to look at perhaps small reactor technology and some things that are possible. We also have a partnership with the Idaho National Lab. And ladies and gentlemen, I think there is another heretofore hidden opportunity for us both that could dramatically improve North American energy security, and yes, it involves fossil fuels. It is, quite simply, oil recovery rate technology. In Saskatchewan, we have about 45.6 billion barrels of oil in place. More than 38 billion barrels of it cannot be recovered today with current technology, and we've made strides in technology. That's roughly the same percentages in your country for oil-producing states and regions. We leave a lot of oil behind, 60, 70, 80%, because the technologies are lacking to get at it. If we could increase our recovery rate through innovation and technology by just 5%, it would triple our recoverable reserves of oil. That's the exponential magical math of enhanced oil recovery. And friends, it should be the subject of focus for our respective governments on the research side, for post-secondary institutions, and especially for companies, that we would find a way to not just maybe move it up 5%, but how about 10%? How about a 10% recovery rate increase in 5 years and increase our recoverable reserves in this oil-rich continent of ours by 6-fold? This should be, I think, the next man-moon mission in terms of science. Maybe it's not as attractive, but it's very, very important. There are a couple of other things that we can do collectively to help on the continental energy security front. The first is to be, and I think most would agree at this conference, the first would to be very cautious, very circumspect about the next iteration of environmental policy, cap and trade. Because if the cap implies, wherever it is, on your side of the border or ours, if the cap implies that there's going to be penalties levied on high emitters, and the proceeds of the crime, the proceeds of those penalties will then be used to fund other government activities, ladies and gentlemen, that's not environmental policy, that's just a tax. If, for example, though, we are prepared to work with companies and say, look, we have certain emissions targets, and if you exceed them, we will with that build a fund, a technological fund that you can apply to company X, Y, and Z to find more sustainable ways for energy development, maybe to focus on recovery rate or clean coal. We ought to be doing that. And by the way, our province is also wanting to provide a leadership position in clean coal technology. It's not an oxymoron. We have now underway the largest clean coal demonstration project in the world at a place called Boundary Dam. I can tell you the technology is coming in to be comparable with combined cycle natural gas. We're investing money in it. The private sector is investing money in it because they want the CO2 for what? Enhanced oil recovery. There are some things we can be doing with the proceeds of these levies, if you have them, other than them just being a tax. Here's the other thing we've got to be very careful about, I think, in this on our continent in terms of energy security. And that's efficient continental energy transportation. We do have a lot of energy in North America, in different corners of North America, and we've got to be able to get it here from there, which brings me to the Keystone pipeline. It is the nexus of as much myth-making and interest group fiction as any conspiracy theory of any day. And so I want to offer respectfully some facts today. Perhaps I have the added credibility that we have no oil sands in commercial production in Saskatchewan. That's next door in Alberta. We hope to, frankly. We got about 10,000 square miles of potential oil sands area, but it's not quite geologically ready. They don't quite have the technology. So maybe we have a bit more credibility on the oil sands because we don't yet have a dog in that hunt. Although I will point this out. Not all of the oil in that pipeline you may have heard about is oil sands oil. Up to 25% is conventional, and it's from the back end. And that's us, but it's also America. It's North Dakota, and it's Montana, and that's an important part of the story as well. Here's some facts. 20,000 new American jobs in construction and related manufacturing, about 118,000 spin-off jobs as well during 2 years of construction for the pipeline. Here's a fact, without this oil, America is simply more dependent on oil from places like Venezuela and the Middle East. Opponents of the pipeline have their own version of the facts. Al Gore has said that the oil inside the pipeline is, quote, the dirtiest fuel on the planet. No hyperbole there. He is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. He is wrong. His opposition echoes that of ill-informed glitterati. Celebrities from Hollywood have weighed in and other protesters who simply don't have the facts. We have them today. There are some inconvenient truths on these slides that I'm about to show you, and I hope that people can hear them above the din of their private jet engines. Here's one slide. Here's a slide in particular, and I'm going to go through some data that's represented on some of the slides that are here as well. But let me share with you this, a life cycle comparison of North American and imported crudes prepared by the Jacobs Consultancy shows that oil from Venezuela and Iraq has about the same carbon dioxide footprint as SAGD in situ. That's steam-assisted gravity oil sands oil, not necessarily the mined type, but the steam-assisted oil sands that's there. And of course, a bigger footprint than Saskatchewan oil, which is light and sweet and friendly. And here's the payoff pitch, ladies and gentlemen. Oil sands oil, especially if it's SAGD, which would be a lot of the oil sands oil we're talking about, that steam-assisted gravity, is cleaner from a CO2 perspective than North California thermal oil, or oil from places like Nigeria. So when you go and watch the video, here's another study, I think that's Cambridge. So when you go and watch the video opinion piece on in the New York Times and hear Robert Redford tell you that Keystone will, quote, promote the most damaging industrial practices ever devised, remember, he doesn't necessarily know what he's talking about. The facts, the facts aren't backing these folks up. When you read in the pages of the New Yorker how James Hansen is now calling the oil sands, quote, extreme energy, and its further development being tantamount to, quote, game over for the planet, end quote. It is the worst kind of hyperbole. I'll tell you, with great respect, what extreme energy is. It's energy that has to be secured, directly or indirectly, by the women and men of the armed forces of the United States of America. That's extreme energy. On this point, I'd like to thank Governor Hyndman in Nebraska. I had a chance to talk to him earlier this week. To thank him for, first of all, being worried about habitat in his state, and the aquifer in his state was the best, frankly, the most reasonable argument against not just a pipeline, but any development, the future water interests of the state of Nebraska and of the Midwest. And what did they do next? They found a compromise. And now they've punted to the White House, and they're saying, we're ready for the jobs. We think we've found a way to make this thing even more sustainable. And so I want to acknowledge that. And I just want, again, to remind us all that when the forces against the pipeline and against Canadian energy call our oil dirty, they forget to mention that California thermal oil is dirtier. They never mention that Canada, the Canadian oil companies, provincial governments are spending billions of dollars to reduce the CO2 footprint of our oil development, to replace habitat. They don't mention that it's oil from a friend. They don't mention that it's oil from a lover of liberty, that it's oil from a champion of human rights and the rule of law, a place where we do not deny rights to women because they are women. Al Gore calls our oil dirty oil. We call it ethical oil, and we ask that everyone consider the alternatives and the sources of those alternatives, countries where that oil might otherwise come from, if not from our country. No matter the quantum of the gap that exists in this debate, let's make no mistake, the measure of that gap in the debate is in CO2 and not the blood of patriots. The current debate is important because this debate on energy and on the pipeline, it's really about our relationship. There's other protectionist sabers that are rattling on both sides of the border, and we need to be vigilant. We need to guard against them. This relationship of ours is an integrated value chain. An invisible line separates us, but what brings us together is not just commerce, but friendship and family and history. 34 out of the 50 states have Canada as their #1 export market. Saskatchewan supplies America more oil than Kuwait, and a lot of it is refined by American workers at Conoco and Exxon refineries in Billings, Montana. Our oil creating jobs in America. We do grow a quarter of the world's mustard seed, but we don't actually make any mustard. You do a lot of that. You actually bottle the mustard, and most of it finds its way into my tie. But the jobs are created in this country. We grow the oats, and much to my kids' disappointment, you turn it into porridge. But you create jobs in the bargain. Even our football team, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, out of our team, 34 members of the team are Americans. So we're trying to employ Americans to create jobs in this trading relationship everywhere we can. That's Darian Durant. He's He's our great quarterback from Florence, South Carolina. Folks, let us at this fragile moment in the economy, let us not be distracted by ill-informed debate and by protectionism that either masquerades as environmentalism or is as unabashed as the Smoot-Hawley Act was that precipitated much of what was worst of the Great Depression. Ours is a partnership, and ours is a friendship, and it holds all the promise of the entrepreneurs who live in our countries and the innovators and the lovers of liberty. So we ought to tend to it in that way. We ought to treat it for the relationship that it is. John F. Kennedy said, "Geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies. Those whom nature has so joined together, let no man put asunder." As I conclude, I just want to say that as your country seeks to find its way to economic recovery, permit me these greetings of goodwill from the people of Saskatchewan. On the 1st of December, 1862, President Lincoln sent his annual message to Congress. He used the occasion at the lowest moment in the life of any nation that has long endured, a time when this country was so clean, much more than it is now, or any country could be now, seemingly irreconcilably divided at the time, literally bloodstained and battle-weary, a time when the capitals of Europe were cynically laughing at the Republican experiment on the continent. He used that time to call this country the last best hope of earth. As Americans, if you believe he was right then, without diminishing the challenges that this country faces now, those words must surely be true today, as were the words of your 40th president, when he said America's best days will always be ahead. As for us, we need you. We're cheering for you. We're reaching out to you. We're willing to partner. We're willing to work through this present malaise together, not just because of the commerce that links us, but because of our bond, unique among the nations of the world. It is a bond made by a shared sacrifice for liberty. Shoulder to shoulder, we have fought the oppression of tyrants. Our young men have fallen together at France, on the French countryside, on the beaches of Normandy, and in Incheon, Korea. In times of peace, we have forged free trade agreements that create jobs on both sides of the border. They have been the model and the envy of every nation on the earth. $1 million worth of goods a day across this border. We have worked together to secure the largest undefended border in the history of mankind, and even now as we speak, our Prime Minister and your administration are working at a North American perimeter, something we also support. And when America was attacked with unjustifiable malevolence and cowardice almost, well, now more than 10 years ago, we wept with you. And when the smoke began to clear, we grew angry with you. We found our resolve with you. And in Afghanistan against terror and tyranny, still today, we fight with you alongside you. I've been to the funerals of Saskatchewan heroes whose pall was bared up by our own armed forces heroes. So I also know that in this cause, we die with you too. Some may ask why. It has nothing to do with pipelines or mustard or oats or any commerce, but it has everything to do with this. When it mattered most, you have been there for us. You have been there for the liberty that we prize. And we have tried to be there for you. We've been there for each other, because that's what friends do. May God bless the Dominion of Canada and these United States of America. Thanks for the chance to be here.